I never imagined I'd find myself in this position, sitting in a dimly lit cafe, my hands trembling around a cup of coffee, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. Claire was sitting across from me, looking at me with those eyes. Eyes I once knew so well, but now felt like they were staring right through me. I could feel the weight of her gaze, a mix of exhaustion and something else I couldn't quite pinpoint. It wasn't anger, exactly, but there was no warmth left. The silence between us was suffocating. My mind was racing, but nothing came out of my mouth. What was there to say, anyway? I could feel her anger, but it wasn't the kind of anger that was easy to talk through. This was something deeper, something quieter. It was resignation, and I hated myself for it. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for not doing more when I had the chance. Matt, she finally spoke, her voice low, almost fragile. I don't even know where to begin. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. Words that would somehow make this all better, even though I knew nothing could. I could already feel the words building up in my chest, but when I opened my mouth, they just died there. There was nothing left, just an overwhelming sense of failure. I know, I managed to say, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I know, I messed up. She didn't respond right away. She just stared at me, the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was sadness. But I wasn't sure anymore. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure I could tell the difference between her anger and her sadness. They felt like the same thing now, all tangled up in the mess we'd made. You always say that, Matt, she said, shaking her head slightly. You always say you messed up. But it's more than that. It's not just about the mistakes. It's about the fact that I'm still here, still trying, and you're still. She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew where it was going. Still trying, and you're still nothing. That's what she wanted to say. That's what I had become in her eyes. I don't know what you want from me, I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. The words felt like a plea, like I was begging for something, anything to fix this. But I didn't even know what I was asking for. Claire's gaze softened just a fraction, but it didn't make a difference. I don't even know what I want anymore, she whispered, looking down at her hands. I don't know if I'm still trying. I don't know if I should be. I could feel my chest tightening. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold her hand, to tell her that I could change. But even I didn't believe it anymore. She didn't believe it either. I don't know if I can change, I muttered, more to myself than to her. But the words felt true, in a way that terrified me. I didn't even know who I was anymore. The guy I had been, the guy she used to love, he felt like a stranger to me now. I had become something else, something worse. There was a pause, and for a moment, I could hear the faint sound of a spoon tapping against a cup from a nearby table. The world outside the cafe seemed so distant, so far away, like it wasn't even real anymore. Everything felt muffled, like I was underwater. I wish I could believe you, Claire finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I really do. But the thing is, Matt, you never really changed. Not for me. Not for us. And I don't think you ever will. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't even angry anymore. Just resigned. And it crushed me more than any outburst ever could. I didn't know what else to do, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I tried. I really did. Claire's gaze lifted from her hands, locking with mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the person I once knew. But it was fleeting. She shook her head slowly. Maybe you did, Matt. Maybe you tried. But I'm tired of being the one to keep things together when you just keep falling apart. There was nothing I could say to that. I couldn't argue. I didn't have the right to anymore. I don't know how to fix this, I whispered, my voice thick. I don't know if I even can. I don't think you can, she replied softly, her eyes glistening but her face set in a way I'd never seen before. And that's the problem. I can't keep waiting for someone who isn't going to change. Not for me, not for anyone. Her words hit me harder than any of her previous ones. It wasn't the anger, the frustration, or the sadness that tore through me. It was the finality in her voice. The way she spoke like she had already accepted that we were over. Like we had already ended. I felt like I was losing everything, and yet I was powerless to stop it. I wanted to scream, to beg her not to go, but all that came out was a hollow, empty silence. I wish I could tell you I'll change, I said quietly, looking at the table. But I can't. Not now. Claire's expression softened, just for a moment. I don't want you to change, Matt. I just wanted you to be here. Be here when I needed you. Her words stung more than I was ready to admit. I wasn't there. Not when it counted. And now I had to live with the fact that I couldn't make it right. Not anymore. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Neither of us spoke for what seemed like ages, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Finally, Claire stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, breaking the silence. I didn't move. I couldn't. She didn't look at me as she turned to walk away, but before she reached the door, she paused, her back still to me. I'm sorry, Matt, she said, her voice barely audible, but this is it. And with that, she walked out of my life. I sat there for a long time after she left, the cold cup of coffee sitting untouched in front of me, the world outside continuing on without me. And in that moment, I realized just how far gone I was. I sat there for what felt like hours after Claire walked out, the cafe around me fading into the background. The murmur of voices, the clink of cups, the soft jazz playing overhead. All of it seemed distant, like I wasn't even part of it anymore. The air felt thick, suffocating almost. I had no idea what time it was, but I knew it didn't matter. I should have left, should have stood up and walked out after her, begged her to come back, pleaded for another chance, for anything. But instead, I stayed. I couldn't bring myself to move, let alone face what was left. It didn't make sense, but it was like I was frozen in place, trapped by my own failure. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour, maybe 2. It didn't matter. The longer I sat, the more I realized just how much I had fucked up. I looked at my phone for the first time in what felt like forever. I'd missed a dozen messages, all from work, some from friends, and one from my mom asking if I was okay. But nothing from Claire. Not a single message. And why would there be? She was done. The message from my mom was a simple, "How are you doing?" I didn't even know how to respond to that. How could I tell her the truth? That I was sitting in a coffee shop, falling apart, while the person I loved most in the world was slipping away from me for good. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and stood up. My legs were stiff, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. Everything felt like it was shifting beneath me, and I had no idea where to even begin picking up the pieces. I had to leave. I had to go home. Maybe the silence would help. Maybe if I just waited long enough, I'd be able to think more clearly. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just running from the cafe. I was running from everything that had led to this point. I stumbled out into the street, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and walked without a destination. I didn't know where I was going, didn't even care. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to keep pretending like I wasn't shattered into 1,000 pieces. The streets were busy, people going about their lives as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't just turned upside down for me. I watched them, everyone lost in their own little worlds, and for a moment, I felt like I was invisible. I thought about texting Claire. But what would I say? I'm sorry? I love you? It felt so hollow. Those words didn't mean anything anymore. Not after everything. I found myself walking to the park. I didn't know why, but it felt like a place where I could think, where I could try to breathe again. I sat on a bench by the pond, the cold metal biting through my jeans, but I didn't care. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about everything we had, everything we lost. The way she used to laugh, the way she would rest her head on my shoulder at night, the little things that had once made our relationship feel effortless. How could I have let it all slip away? How could I have let her slip away? My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out without thinking, half hoping it was a message from Claire. But it wasn't. It was just an email from work, reminding me of a meeting I was supposed to attend in 2 hours. I let out a dry laugh. Work. That seems so irrelevant now. But I had to go, didn't I? Life didn't just stop because everything else had fallen apart. I looked around the park, the empty benches, the bare trees. It felt like a metaphor for my life right now. Empty and cold, everything stripped away. I hadn't been paying attention to the things that mattered, and now I was left with nothing. The thought of going home made me feel sick. There was no point in going back to that empty apartment with its quiet, sterile rooms. The place we had once shared felt more like a tomb now, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I stood up again, walking aimlessly through the park, my mind a mess of broken thoughts. I thought about Claire's face as she walked out, how she'd looked at me one last time. Her expression so unreadable, so final. I couldn't shake the image. The rest of the night was a blur. I don't even remember walking home. All I remember is the feeling of emptiness, the gnawing ache in my chest. I could barely keep my eyes open, but every time I closed them, I saw Claire's face. I saw the disappointment, the hurt. I stumbled into my apartment, the lights off, the place dark and cold, just the way I left it. I dropped my keys onto the counter, feeling like the world was crashing down around me. My reflection in the window seemed foreign, like I didn't even recognize myself. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV, scrolling through my phone, but it was useless. I couldn't escape the thoughts that kept circling in my head. The guilt, the regret, the overwhelming sense that I had lost her, lost everything, and there was no way to fix it. I didn't want to feel like this. I didn't want to be the guy who ruined everything, but I had. And now I was stuck with the consequences. The weight of it was unbearable. I lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling, willing sleep to take me, to numb the pain, even for just a little while. But sleep didn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about the past, about how everything had been so easy once, how we used to talk for hours, about everything and nothing, how we used to dream about the future, about where we'd go, what we'd do. And now I couldn't even remember when things started to fall apart, when we stopped being happy, when I stopped being the man she needed. I didn't know how long I lay there, but eventually, the darkness of the night was broken by the faintest light creeping through the window. I still didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be able to fix this on my own, and that scared me more than anything. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the coffee table. At first, I couldn't tell if it was real or just some lingering echo in my head, a part of me still trapped in the haze of sleep. But the buzzing persisted, louder this time, and I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear away the fog. I glanced at the screen, hoping it was her. Some sign that maybe, just maybe, she'd reached out. But it wasn't Claire. It was a reminder about my upcoming work meeting, another obligation I didn't care about. I silenced the phone and tossed it back onto the table. I could hear the faint sounds of the city outside my window. Cars honking, people talking, a distant siren. Life was going on as usual, completely oblivious to what had just happened to me. I sat there for a while, just listening, unable to move. I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. The silence in the apartment was oppressive. I had been avoiding it, trying to keep busy, but now it was all-consuming. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the space was shrinking around me, suffocating me. I kept thinking about how it had all unraveled so quickly. One minute everything was fine, and the next, it was gone. I should have tried harder. I should have paid attention to the little things. The way Claire used to get frustrated when I didn't listen, the way she'd light up when I showed interest in her day. All of those little moments that I had let slip by because I was too caught up in my own world. The guilt was like a weight on my chest, pressing down harder with every passing minute. I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen. I hadn't eaten much the past few days, hadn't really had the appetite for anything. But I needed to do something, anything to get my mind off the mess I'd created. I stared at the empty mugs in the cabinet, feeling the emptiness in my stomach mirror the one in my chest. The world outside felt so distant. The apartment felt foreign to me, as though it wasn't my home anymore. I used to love the quiet mornings, sitting in this same spot, reading the paper with Claire beside me. Now, it was just a reminder of what I had lost. I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, looking around like I was seeing it for the first time. The couch where we'd spent hours talking, the kitchen table where we used to have dinner together. It all seemed so meaningless now. Nothing felt real anymore. Everything was just empty. I thought about going for a walk, trying to clear my head. But where would I even go? The places I used to go now seemed tainted, filled with memories of Claire, memories I didn't know how to process. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't outrun the weight in my chest. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the blank wall in front of me. The quiet was deafening. My thoughts kept circling back to her. Her face, the way her eyes had looked at me when she walked out. It haunted me. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't even know where to start. I grabbed my phone again, but this time, I didn't just check the notifications. I opened my messages, scrolling through our old conversations. I hadn't looked at them in days, but now I needed to. I needed to feel something, anything that reminded me of what we had. There were texts from a few months ago, from when things were still good. The jokes we shared, the plans we made, the little things that had felt so important at the time. And then, as I kept scrolling, I saw the shift. The messages started getting shorter, less frequent. The tone changed, from light and playful to distant and guarded. It was like I could trace the exact moment when things started to fall apart, and it was all my fault. I wanted to call her, to beg her to come back, to say all the things I should have said before. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She was done. She had made that clear when she walked out. No amount of apologies could undo the damage I had done. I felt like a fool. A selfish, stupid fool. I had taken her for granted, thought she would always be there, always be willing to put up with my mistakes. But I had pushed her too far. She wasn't coming back. The tears came without warning, and I didn't even try to stop them. I let them fall, silent and steady, as I sat there alone in the silence of the apartment. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know what came next. All I knew was that everything I had built, everything I had taken for granted, was gone, and I was left here, staring at a phone that wouldn't ring, at an empty space that once held all my hopes for the future. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. I hadn't even realized how much time had passed. It felt like I had been in this space forever, suspended in this moment where nothing felt real. I finally stood up and went to the window, staring out at the city below. It looked the same as it always did, busy, alive, full of people going about their lives. But for me, everything felt different. Everything felt off. I didn't know how to navigate the world without her in it. I didn't know how to live with the weight of my mistakes. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in the cool breeze that filtered through the cracks in the window. It felt like the only thing in the world that hadn't changed. But even that didn't offer any comfort. The world kept turning, whether I was ready for it or not. And as much as I hated it, I knew that I had to find a way to keep going, even if it felt impossible. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep running from this. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Every morning I woke up with the same heavy feeling, the same gnawing emptiness in my chest. I had started to fall into a routine, a kind of autopilot mode where I just went through the motions, work, eat, sleep, repeat. But none of it mattered. None of it felt real. I kept telling myself that I needed to focus, that I needed to get my life together. But it was hard when everything reminded me of her. Every little detail, every corner of the apartment, had something of Claire in it. The way she'd leave her books scattered around, the coffee cups she'd always forget to put in the sink, the notes she'd leave on the fridge that I used to ignore. It was like I couldn't escape her, and I didn't want to. I was in the kitchen one evening, cooking dinner for myself out of pure habit, when I saw a photo of us on the fridge. It was from a trip we'd taken to the coast last summer. I could still hear her laughter echoing in my mind, see her face lit up by the sunlight as we stood together on the beach. We had been so happy then, so in love. I thought that would last forever. But forever had been a lie. The anger started to creep in. Anger at myself for letting it all slip away, for not realizing what I had until it was too late. There was a part of me that still couldn't believe it had happened. That the woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, was gone. That she had walked out, and that I was the one who pushed her to do it. I hadn't reached out to her since that day. Part of me wanted to, desperately wanted to. But another part of me knew that it would only make things worse. She had made it clear that she needed space, that she needed time away from me. And I respected that, even though it killed me inside. I stared at the photo for a moment longer, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to fix this when I didn't even know where to start? I ran a hand through my hair, trying to push the thoughts away, but they kept flooding back. It felt like everything I did was just a distraction from the real issue. The fact that I had hurt the one person I loved more than anything in the world, and I didn't know how to make it right. The days blurred together. It had been a week since Claire left, and the only thing that had changed was that I had stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a message from her. I didn't want to bother her, didn't want to make her feel like she was obligated to talk to me. But the silence was deafening. It was the loudest thing in my life now, and it hurt more than anything else. I started going to the gym more frequently, mostly to get out of the apartment, to do something that made me feel like I was in control of my life again. The physical exhaustion helped clear my mind for a little while, but it was temporary. As soon as I got home, the weight of everything hit me all over again. I was standing in the gym one evening, staring at my reflection in the mirror, when it hit me. I had spent so much time beating myself up, so much time focusing on my mistakes, that I hadn't stopped to think about what Claire was going through. I knew she had been unhappy for a while. I had seen the signs but refused to acknowledge them, too wrapped up in my own issues to pay attention. She had tried to tell me, tried to get me to listen, but I had ignored her. Now, I had to live with the consequences. It wasn't just about fixing things between us anymore. It was about understanding why I had failed her, why I hadn't been the partner she needed. I couldn't change the past, but I could start by understanding it. I owed her that much, at least. That night, I texted her. It wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't some over-the-top apology. It was simple, honest, and from the heart. I'm sorry, Claire. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I know I messed up. I didn't listen, and I took you for granted. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be better. For you. For me. I miss you. I hope we can talk soon. I sent it, then sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for something to happen. It felt like the longest moment of my life, that anticipation, the hope and fear that were tangled up together. But nothing came. Hours passed, and I found myself checking my phone repeatedly. It felt like time had frozen, like I was waiting for her to text me back, to tell me that it was okay, that we could work things out. But deep down, I knew that it was never going to be that simple. I went to bed that night with the same knot in my stomach, the same uncertainty hanging over me. I wasn't sure if she'd respond, and I wasn't sure what I would do if she didn't. But at least I had said what needed to be said. I had taken the first step, even if it didn't feel like enough. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I grabbed it, hoping it was Claire, but it wasn't. It was a work email. I sighed and tossed the phone back on the bed. I didn't want to think about work. I didn't want to think about anything else but her. I had made the first move. Now, all I could do was wait. The next few days dragged on. I tried to keep myself busy, but there was only so much work, gym time, and grocery shopping I could do before my thoughts started to wander back to her. I'd find myself staring at my phone, half expecting a message from Claire, even though I knew I shouldn't be. I kept telling myself that if she wanted to reach out, she would, that I had already done everything I could by sending that text. But the silence gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd ruined everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the sound of her voice in my head, the way she used to laugh, the way she said my name, the way her presence filled up a room. And now, there was nothing. Just this overwhelming emptiness. It wasn't just the absence of her that hurt. It was knowing that I had caused it. I had taken everything for granted, pushed her away when I should have been listening. There were moments when I thought maybe she had already moved on, that she didn't need me anymore. But then there were moments of hope, moments where I remembered that she had loved me once, and maybe, just maybe, she still cared. I was sitting at my desk, working on a project, when I heard the ping of a new message. My heart stopped for a second, my hands freezing over the keyboard. I glanced at my phone, almost not wanting to check, afraid of what I might find. It was Claire. The message was short, just a few words. But those few words felt like the weight of the world. I miss you too. Let's talk. My stomach did a flip. I couldn't breathe for a moment. This was it. The opening I had been waiting for. But as quickly as the excitement came, it was replaced by a rush of fear. What did this mean? Did she want to try again? Did she just want closure? I didn't know, but I had to find out. I stared at the message for a few more seconds, then quickly typed out a response, my fingers trembling slightly as I did. When and where? The reply came almost immediately. Tonight. My place, 7? I felt like I had been hit by a wave of emotions. Relief, excitement, nervousness, all of it crashing over me. I hadn't seen her in over a week, hadn't heard her voice since she left. I had no idea what to expect, but I couldn't pass up the chance. I spent the rest of the afternoon getting ready. I took longer than usual with my appearance, something I hadn't thought about in ages. It felt like a small step, a way to show her that I cared, that I was trying, that I wasn't the person I had been when we first fell apart. When the time came, I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. My heart was pounding in my chest, every step I took toward her apartment feeling heavier than the last. It felt surreal. I had no idea what to expect when I saw her again. Would we pick up where we left off? Would everything feel different? Would it be awkward? I had no answers, but I had to face whatever came next. I arrived at her building around 10 minutes early, standing in front of her door for what felt like forever, trying to steady my breathing. When I finally knocked, the door opened almost immediately. There she was. She looked the same, and yet, everything felt different. She hadn't changed, but there was a distance between us now, an unspoken tension hanging in the air. "Hey," she said quietly, her voice a little hesitant, but still familiar. "Hey," I replied, my voice rougher than I expected. There was a long pause before she stepped aside to let me in. I walked into the apartment, the same one we had spent so many nights in together, and for a moment, it felt like time had rewound. It felt like it could all go back to how it was. But I knew it couldn't. Too much had happened. We stood there in silence for a few moments, unsure of where to start. Finally, Claire broke the quiet. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." "Me too," I replied, swallowing hard. "I don't know what to say. I've messed up, Claire. I know that, and I don't know how to fix it." She nodded, her eyes downcast for a moment before meeting mine. "I don't know if there's a quick fix, but I think we owe it to ourselves to talk. To really talk." We sat down on the couch, facing each other, and the conversation started slowly, like we were both testing the waters. But as the minutes passed, the words started to flow more freely, and the more we talked, the more I realized how much I had missed this. Missed her. Missed us. We talked about the mistakes we'd both made, the things we hadn't said, the moments we had let slip away. I apologized again, over and over, for taking her for granted, for not being the partner she needed. And she apologized too, for not communicating better, for holding things in when she should have spoken up. There were tears. From both of us. The kind of tears that felt healing, like we were both finally allowing ourselves to feel the pain we had been holding back for so long. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. "I don't know what happens next," Claire said quietly, wiping her eyes. "I don't know if we can just go back to how things were. But I do know that I want to try. I think we both need to try." "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice raw. "I'll be better, Claire. I just need you to know that I'm not giving up on us." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a promise that everything would magically be okay. But it was something real. I stayed at her place that night, but we didn't rush things. We talked some more, about everything and nothing. It felt like we were learning how to communicate all over again, how to be vulnerable and honest with each other. We didn't have all the answers, but we were both trying. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't as scared of the future. Whatever happened, I knew we'd be okay as long as we kept talking, as long as we kept trying. The next few weeks passed by in a blur, a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. Claire and I were taking things slow, but it felt different this time. There were no big declarations, no promises that we could somehow erase the past. We were just figuring out how to be with each other again, without the weight of old mistakes hanging over us. It was messy, it was awkward, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind the mess. We spent more time together. Lazy afternoons at the park, nights cooking dinner at her apartment, quiet mornings sipping coffee and talking about nothing in particular. There were moments when it felt easy, like we'd never stopped being a couple. But there were also moments of tension, where the silence between us felt too heavy, the questions lingering unspoken. Were we moving forward, or just avoiding the real work? Were we actually healing, or just trying to get back to what we once had? One night, about a month after we'd started talking again, we were sitting on the couch, both of us wrapped in blankets, watching an old movie we used to love. It was one of those evenings that felt perfectly ordinary, nothing dramatic, just the kind of night that could have easily been lost in the shuffle of our busy lives. But as I glanced over at Claire, I realized something had shifted. She looked different, and not just in the way someone looks after a long day. There was a quiet certainty in her eyes, a calmness that I hadn't seen in a while. "Hey," I said, nudging her gently. "You okay?" She hesitated for a second, then turned to face me, her expression soft but serious. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability I wasn't used to hearing. "About us. About what we want, what we need. And I think we've both been afraid of what might happen if we really try again." I felt my stomach tighten, a rush of anxiety flooding me. "What do you mean? Are you saying you're not sure?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's not it. I'm just saying, I don't want to repeat the same mistakes, you know? I don't want us to slip back into old patterns, to think that just because we're talking again, everything is fixed. We have to keep trying. For real. For us." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. She was right. I had been so focused on the fact that we were together again that I hadn't really thought about the work it would take to make things last. We weren't magically going to return to how we'd been before. But what we had now was something different, something more fragile but real. And I didn't want to lose it. "I agree," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to mess this up again. But I think we can make it work, Claire. I really do." She smiled then, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like everything had come full circle. We were still figuring it out, but we were both committed to the process, to being honest with each other, to facing the difficult conversations instead of running from them. "I think we'll be okay," she said softly, her hand reaching out to find mine. "It's not going to be easy, but we've got a shot. And that's enough." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The weeks that followed were not without their challenges. There were times when we still stumbled, when the weight of the past crept in, reminding us of everything we'd been through. But we worked through it. Slowly, carefully, we built something new, something stronger. It wasn't about perfection. It was about being willing to try, even when it felt like we didn't have all the answers. Even when the fear of failure lingered just beneath the surface. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. By the time summer arrived, things between us were different, better in a way. We had learned to communicate more openly, to listen without judgment, to give each other space when needed and be there when it counted. We were no longer defined by the mistakes of our past, but by the promise of what we could build together moving forward. I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. We still had a long way to go. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. We had come so far from where we were a few months ago, and no matter what happened, I knew that as long as we kept trying, we'd find a way to make it work. Because that's what love was, after all, about choosing each other, over and over again, even when it felt like the easiest thing would be to walk away. And I wasn't ready to walk away. Not now. Not ever.